Thank you. Just a little bit of my accolades, workbook. I wrote a memoir. I want to give special thanks to my mentor, Dr. Zebo from Florida A&M, and Emcee Asante from Morgan State University, who taught me about the elements of hip-hop and psychology and the trauma recovery part. So I want to talk about hip-hop origins. And a few points that we're going to touch on is the South Bronx, where hip-hop was birthed from, 1970s, that era. The father of hip-hop, DJ Kool Herc, and oppression. KRS-Ones have one of my favorite quotes, hip-hop was born from oppression and it's a voice to the voiceless. So those are some of the key points that we're going to touch up on, so stay with me. So if you guys see this slide, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I want to take you guys back to the South Bronx of 1970, where hip-hop came from. And if you look closely at this picture, you see black children, but you see them standing in the midst of just abandoned buildings that look like they got caught on fire. And the reason of this is because during the summer in the Bronx in 1970, it was a crisis. The crisis was every building seemed to be burning and being on fire. And this is because a lot of people say it was the heat, it was overheated, and then the poverty. So a lot of the building and business owners started doing insurance scams. So look at this picture, because even though these children are in what seems chaos, they're smiling. I want you guys to check out a documentary. It's called The Decade of the Fire, South Bronx. This filmmaker basically highlighted the summer of 1970 of how the Bronx was burning up. But even though that this was happening, this is what came to be hip-hop. Look at this slide. This is one of my favorite classic pictures. This was the first hip-hop block party, right? You got the fan. You see the brother, he got the fan and he's cooling down the radiator because it was so hot. It was like a heat wave in the South Bronx in 1970s. But people still had to dance, people still had to express themselves. So they started throwing block parties. And these block parties became notorious because you had these big speakers with this bass and these watts. And you had this music coming out. And it would attract people. And they used to play this music kind of like in these like basketball courts. So they'll turn the basketball courts to dance floors, right? And this is how we had the block party. This is real cool if you look at this picture. This is all how it started. And we want to give homage to DJ Kool Herc. He's the originator. So quick story on DJ Kool Herc, because I always like to pay homage when we talk about hip-hop and the origins of hip-hop. DJ Kool Herc was born in Jamaica. And kind of sort of like my story, my father was an MC, my mother was a singer. They had their record label. His father was a DJ. And his father was a backup DJ, I also believe, for the Wailers, Bob Marley. So his father had all these records. His father played the records, traveled with Bob Marley, and he would realize how they can rock a set. They can rock a set. So they moved to the Bronx, and he got all his father records, and he started holding these block parties. And this is how hip-hop was birthed. So we really like to say that hip-hop is the daughter of Jamaican music, reggae. So let's talk about the elements of hip-hop. The first element is DJing, which we like to say scratching. And DJ Kool Herc was a DJ. And you can't have hip-hop if you don't have a DJ. So this is the most important element in hip-hop. Then we got the B-boy. Now, the B-boy got his name because when the DJ would stop a record, that's when the B-boys start to dance and really get down. So B-boy is short for break boy. Break girl, B-girl, break dancing. So after that, you would have an MC, and the MC will try to rock the crowd. Everybody put your hands in the air, rock the crowd. So it's in numerologically, it's in order, 1, 2, 3, 4. First you have the DJ, then you have the B-boy, then you have the MC. And last but not least, you have the graffiti artist. Now we know what graffiti is. We see it all on the trains. We see it all on the walls. That was basically somebody who can tag. They would tag. Now I think it's very important, and I have 5 additional elements in my books, but these are the most important elements of hip-hop, which makes it more than a music genre. It's really a culture. This is what the bricks and the foundation of hip-hop. And what I like to add is that this lets you know how, I'm going to go back to this picture, these impoverished children had to express themselves. Those are the 4 elements, okay? Voice of the voiceless, power of expression. That's what it's about. Everybody had to transfer, you know, that frustration of living in poverty, of living next door to burning buildings. And it gave them a platform. And to this day, hip-hop is still one of the biggest platforms for people who feel like they don't have a voice. So I want to get to part 2, which is trauma. And part 3, I'm going to correlate and bring it back together. But I want to talk about trauma. What is trauma? Trauma is a noun. It's a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, right? So we have that definition. What is trauma effects on the brain? Now, this is a slide, and I chose this slide because I wanted to give you guys a visual aid of what trauma does to the brain physically. So if we look at the left side, and you see the typical development. This is a healthy child who didn't experience any trauma, childhood trauma. They have, the biggest part of the triangle is the cognition. They use a lot of their prefrontal cortex. They like to think, they like to imaginate, they probably like to sing, do art. They feel safe, so they get to use the prefrontal cortex of their brain. They have normal cognition. Then you have the social emotional, the regulation, and the survival. Now the survival, if we look at this triangle, that's the smallest aspect of a Now let's go to the left triangle. The person who has experienced trauma, such as myself, and I'll get on that later. You see, survival compared to this left side, that's the biggest aspect that developing brain experience. Then you have regulation, social emotional, and cognition. So cognition, which is opposite, is the smallest part of the brain that developing child or person is experiencing. Now, why is that? I believe, and the research has proven, the person who's developing this trauma, they don't feel safe or they have extreme abuse and neglect. So they're trying to survive. They can't think ahead, which is the prefrontal. They only can use their stem, which is to stay safe. Now that's very problematic with the child, right? Because the child brain is developing, but it's arrested. It's arrested developing. Now this is trauma in the brain development. Keep this image in your mind. Black trauma. Now what is black trauma? And I have a few points I want to talk about. Today in the United States of America, 1 out of every 9 black child and 1 out of every 28th Hispanic child has an incarcerated parent, in comparison to 1 in 57 white children, or fewer than 2%. When a parent is sent to jail, it can traumatize the child and have long-term impacts such as being neglected, abused, or witnessing domestic violence. Now, this is sobering for me because I experienced parents who was incarcerated. I experienced witnessing these type of domestic violence. The fact that a child, 1 out of every 9 child that's Black and Hispanic has a parent that's gone to jail, that's very problematic, and it shows you that this is a society issue which is affecting children, right? This is Black trauma, which we also can call racial trauma, systematic institution racism. It all plays effect on how it impacts the households, right? Because if a child doesn't have both parents or is neglected, their main primary concern is surviving, right? So it's kind of like the soil, the plant that's in the healthy soil, which gets to grows, and the plant that's in the sick soil that doesn't flourish. Now this is another slide with statistic, and it's kind of like a graph and a visual aid, which talks about Black trauma, the high rates of poverty in African American communities, the large number of single parent households, the high rates of substance abuse, and the greater degree of interactions of African American children with mandated reporters. This is very important. And I picked this because in my own memoir, in my own story, in my healing, I experienced all of these. And I thought I was alone. So, as a childhood trauma, I experienced neglect, like I mentioned before, extreme poverty, I witnessed domestic abuse, and I had incarcerated parents. I'm also very fortunate to have intervention, which I had a foster mother, somebody who took me and introduced me to a therapist, and I went, to college and graduated, did all these great things. But before that, and I'm just being transparent, I did suffer from depression. I did suffer from poor memory. I did suffer from poor sleep and complex trauma, which would affect my physical body until I start sharing my story and releasing this, right? And so my theory is, which I'm going to get into later, is the power of music. Music elicits memory. So the way that I was able to heal and write a memoir and do films and record music is I would listen to music that was correlated to that traumatic experience. And when I hear that song and I think of that traumatic experience, I can then define it. And I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a survivor. So this is something I learned when I was an undergrad, that music elicits memory. And when you are time traveling, you can use different sensories to elicit different emotions. And I use this on myself because I was tired of suffering from poor sleep, depression, poor memory, and, just not feeling comfortable enough to share my story with others. So I want to talk about the trauma recovery, part 3. Now, if we look at this is the brain at rest, right, which is like very subtle. Then we look at the right image. This is the brain reaction to music. Now, why do I have this? The reason I have this is because it shows you when you hear a song, your brain and your neurons in your mind, they light up. They light up in every area. I mean, you have memory because of the lyrics and the sound. You have the prefrontal cortex, because you're thinking about what they're saying. Then you hear what they're saying. Then you have the stem because you're moving. So music makes you dance and move, and it's really a great experience. And the reason I played Sugar Hill Gang was because as a child, when I heard that song, I could go to the smell, the taste, the place of where I was at when I first heard it. And that's with my father. He was in the studio rapping it to me, right? And it's a good memory for me because he's deceased. So if we look at this, This is the brain at rest. This is the brain reaction to music. Your brain literally lights up when you listen to music. Now, remind you, this is the trauma recovery part. This is the benefits of music. The benefits of playing and listening to music work several areas of the brain. The audio cortex. You perceive and analyze tones. The hippocampus, the memories, the visual cortex. You're dancing. The prefrontal cortex is control, behavior, expression, decision-making. The motor cortex, movement, playing an instrument. I'm just looking at this and I get excited because your mind and your brain is literally at work and is healing when you're listening to music. And that was part of my healing process because as a child, as somebody who had arrested development, because I was never safe, when I started listening to music and using it as a tool, instead of using this, I started using this, and I started writing and creating my own music, right? And so if you guys can just look at this and take this in and know that that's why music is very important, and we have to be very cognizant of what type of music we're listening to because we're processing it. And I think the most exciting thing about this is the corpus. And if you look, it connects both sides of the brain. It literally balances your left and right brain when you listen to a great song. So, quick story. This is one of my favorite rappers to the right, Tupac Amaru Shakur. I remember going to therapy. I was like, this is with my foster mother. I had to be no more than 13, and I heard her say, give your pain a voice. Give your pain a voice. That always stuck with me when I heard her say, give your pain a voice, because no one ever said that. And no one ever told me that the things that I was experiencing, that I had permission or the right to talk about them, right? So this is a very important quote for me. If you look at Tupac, and if we know his story, and if you ever heard Dear Mother, Dear Mama, or any of his songs, he talked about his traumatic experience because he gave his pain a voice. You have to give your pain a voice. You cannot remain silent, because if you remain silent, you will suffer. So when that therapist told me that, that gave me permission to talk about my story so others could heal. One of my favorite quotes by Bob Marley, when music hits, you feel no pain, right? When music hits, you feel no pain. Let's go back. And this is why. Because you're literally on a trip. This is the pleasure principle, and this is what music does to you. You're on a hip trip. And so that gave me, I put those two together. I was like, it's painful when I talk about my story, but then when I hear a song, it feels good. So I just put the both of them together. Now I want to look at some case studies. If you recognize this lady on my screen, then you will know she's very brilliant, and we just give her homage and thanks. This is Maya Angelou, and one of my favorite authors of all time. She survived childhood trauma, and she's a deceased famous author, and she has over 50 honorary awards. Now, why did I use Maya Angelou, a black woman? Because if you ever read her story, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is she's posing on her book, and that's the reason I wrote a memoir, is because we know what happened to her as a child. We know. And the fact that she gave her pain a voice and it inspired millions, to me, is something that's remarkable. It's like one of the most noblest things you can do is give your pain a voice to inspire others. And she's just a great case study to the effects of finding your voice throughout the pain. So let's give thanks for Maya Angelou. My next case study, Kendrick Lamar. Kid from Compton, black man, and he experienced childhood trauma. And if you listen to his album, How to Pimp a Butterfly, Good Kid, Mad City, Damn, The Song of Kanisha, Section 80, he talks about the things he witnessed as a child, things that I know I wouldn't want my children to witness. And the fact that now he's a Grammy-winning artist and an MC and he won the Pulitzer Prize, I mean, that's like remarkable. And to me, it defines strength. It defines strength, and it lets you know the power of giving your pain a voice. Now, I want to go back to Tupac Amaru Shakur, my last case study, right? He's not with us anymore, but black man, experienced childhood trauma, right? Lived in extreme poverty, was neglected, had an incarcerated parent, Afeni Shakur, had him while she was in jail. And what did we have? He was an award-winning actor, award-winning musician, famous poet, famous author, the Concrete Rose. So what I'm trying to convey is these people of phenomenal strength and talent got there because they gave their pain a voice and they used their trauma recovery to inspire others. And that's what hip-hop basically is. I want you guys to look at this African proverb. It's one of my favorite African proverbs. Until the lion tells his story, it will always glorify the hunter. I remember reading that African proverb, and it just resonated with me strongly because, that's the theme of my whole presentation. Until you tell your story, it will always glorify, your perpetrator. So this is taking your power back when you tell your story, right? And this is the power of music, of hip-hop, because hip-hop was birthed from extreme oppression, but they told their story. And when you hear Kendrick Lamar, you think of a survivor from Compton, right? When you hear Maya Angelou, you think of a survivor from St. Louis, from Arkansas, when you read her literary. When you think of Tupac, you think of a survivor from Baltimore, and LA. In my memoir, I'm a survivor from St. Louis, Missouri, right? I'm going to read this quote from Daniel J. Levitine, and he has a great book called This Is Your Brain on Music, The Science of a Human Obsession. He's a doctor, and he's basically committed his whole life to music therapy. And he has this quote: "For the artist, the goal of the painting or music composition is not to convey literal truth, but an aspect of a universal truth that, if successful, will continue to move and to touch people even as contexts, societies, and cultures change. For the scientists, the goal of a theory is to convey truth for now, to replace the old truth, while accepting that someday this theory too will be replaced by a new truth, because that is the way science advances." So I like this quote because he compares the artists and the scientists, and what they have in common is they just want to convey truth for now, right? And that's very powerful for me personally, because when I speak about my trauma and my memoir, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it, I talk about how hip-hop was all about finding and telling your truth, and the artists job was to just convey that message. I'm conscious of what I'm going through, and I want to convey this message so I can heal. And then we seen the diagram of what happens when you reverse your trauma. So instead of using the stem of your brain, which I had training with Alive and Well STL, and they gave me a cool quote for that. They called the lizard and the wizard, right? And I teach my son the same thing. So instead of using the lizard, I started using the wizard, right? The prefrontal cortex, the emotions, and all of that. And music aided the healing process, and it felt really, really good. And I want to read you guys an excerpt from my memoir, if I may. Just to let you guys know about the power of hip-hop and how it saved my life, which is the title of my book. So how did hip-hop become my passport? KRS-One explained it simply. Hip-hop is the consciousness of oppressed people, and it's not something you do, you are hip-hop. Similar to Maya Angelou's poem and book, I Know Why the Caged Birds Sing, it expresses and embodies the culture of oppressed people who found their voice, hence courage, in a dark place and gained wings towards liberation. Every child in the ghetto looks around and feels like they are in a trap because of the unhealthy conditions and vices until they tap into something remarkable. And I call that imagination. Imagination gives them the ability to recreate their circumstances just by using kumba. Kumba means creativity in Swahili. Then a car box becomes a beat machine. A record player becomes turntables, and their voices. Their voices become sirens. Sirens to proclaim to the world, we are alive. We are alive. So that's an excerpt from my memoir, because, it expresses my truth. When I found my voice, that was like I'm still alive. Now I want to touch on a point, I want to touch on this point, actually, the trauma part. So what's important is we know what music does, but I do want to talk about the typical development, right? So we look at this typical development, we see the cognition, the social emotional regulation, and we compared it to that. Now, the reason music is important and hip-hop as a culture is important, I'm going to go back to the 4 elements, is because these were therapy. I don't know if you guys realize, but when somebody's dancing, that's cathartic release, right? They're moving. And if you ever looked at any research, the most important thing you can do is exercise or dance when you're depressed, right? The Emcee. Now, when them children in the South Bronx, when they start rapping and they start singing, that's emotional release, right? Because they had to get that story out. And so that's why if you ever have anxiety or depression, they tell you to sing or listen to a song. The graffiti artist, that's another form of art therapy, right? The DJ scratching, that's music therapy, because we've seen what music do to your brain. It takes you on a pleasure trip, right? And so I thought this was so dope because I was like, these children, these cats, they didn't know that they were basically being therapeutic when they hooked these turntables up. When they say, hey, let's have a block party, they didn't know that they were healing themselves and their community, right? And so this is very key in understanding the importance of not only music, but of community. This is very important in community, and that's why we say when we have a hip-hop cipher, it's just not a cipher, it's really a healing circle, because those victims that feel like, you know, they've been neglected or abused, when somebody validates their story, they don't become a victim anymore. They become a winner. They become a survivor, right? And so this is why, you know, this is just like a legendary picture that I'm going to put in a frame one day because it just shows you, like, the creativity that poor Blacks and Latinos had to heal themselves, right, which was hip-hop. So that was my last quote by Dr. Daniel. This is your music on brain, about, you know, the artist and truth, which I think you guys should check his book out because he basically talks about everything I talk about. Another book is by Emcee Asante. It's bigger than hip hop. My book, I talk about how hip hop saved my life. I also have a workbook, which I talk about the power and the tools of these hip hop ciphers, which are affirmations. We gonna be all right. Nothing can stop me. I'm all the way up. Keep your head up. And I do this in schools. I do this in juvenile detention centers because, like I said, hip hop is a culture which ushers therapy, right? I also talk about the power of dance, which is really important. We can equate that to exercise, the Soul Train line, but dancing is a form of healing. And, you know, it's something that my grandma used to say. She said, shake the devil off. But it's the truth. It's truth to that. So, you know, if you guys get anything from this lecture and this presentation, put your favorite record on and enjoy it. Truly enjoy it. It's good for your mind, your body, your soul. And I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Yeah, so folks, if you want to, there's a link at the very bottom of the page there, just below the video window. And that link just says click here, ask a question. Go ahead and click on that link. It's going to open up a window for you to type in your question. I will ask the question on your behalf to Aza here, and we will, and then she'll answer it for you. So that way we get everybody to hear the question. Mm-hmm. And so let me ask you a question. So you did mention, this is my question, sorry.
Yeah.
As we get other people bringing questions in. So you mentioned the Sugar Hill Gang because it was the first hip-hop song. So tell me some other ones that have inspired you, because you talked about how listening to music brought back good memories, mm-hmm. how listening to music kind of helped you heal. What are some other songs or even musicians or anything that had other effects on you besides that? I mean, is there anything that you would say was a negative effect? Not that I want to drive to the negative effect, but I mean, we have the good one. Tell me some other good ones or any of the negative ones as well.
This is actually a great question because you guys see this. This is my memoir, 168 pages, right? So literally the whole time I wrote this memoir, I listened to 70s music. And the reason I listened to 70s music is because my father, he was a singer and a rapper, and my mother was a singer. So I listened to a lot of the Shy Lights, the Spinners, Stevie Wonder, Sade, a lot of soul music. The hip hop really didn't come until, like, for me, the 90s and early 2000s. So I was groomed on, like, soul music with, like, beautiful arrangements and heavy instruments. So a song is, I can hear it, like, in the back of my day. It's like Stevie Wonder. I wrote a whole chapter just off a Stevie Wonder album. Mary J. Blige. And to answer your question, that was kind of like some of the negative traumatic experiences that I had to reach back. And I call this principle Sankofa. And it means, it's an African principle, which means to go forward, you must fetch backwards, right? And it's another African principle called Nomo, and this is the power of spoken words. So not only did I have to listen to these songs, I had to sing them to invoke that emotion. And Mary J. Blige, her album, that was pretty painful because that was when my mother neglected us, but she would constantly play and sing Mary J. Blige. So that album, bring back painful memories. But Stevie Wonder, Tupac, all the great 70s music, the OJs, those bring back warm memories.
And then you came up with the analogy that took the trauma from the trauma that you had to the hip hop. So you had the DJ, the graffiti artist, and so forth like that. Mm-hmm. So what was when you had that realization? Can you kind of describe, when that kind of happened, that kind of epiphany that happened for you to draw the parallels?
Man, you asked some really great questions, Kelly. So like to do that for me, my background is in psychology, right? I have a degree in psychology, studying my master's. My mentor is a psychologist. I'm with a group of psychologists. Those are my acquaintances. So we talk about therapy all the time. The epiphany hit me when, like I said, I diagnosed myself. And I was just tired of suffering from these symptoms that I knew, somebody with a psychology background, I knew what I was suffering from. So it hit me actually when my father had, he was killed, and I inherited all his books and his tapes. And I started listening to him, and I started reading it, and I felt good and I felt bad. And I was like, I think I am like going through a transformation. I want to see where this goes. And it led me to writing a memoir and listening to like his entire collection of music. And I was like, okay, this is serious. This is something I want to share with other people.
So if somebody else is going through trauma themselves and they wanted to kind of take, obviously they would, you would probably tell them to go ahead and reach out and get some type of assistance, but
right.
Short of that, is there a process that you feel would be helpful to them if they are musically inclined? Mm-hmm. So you say, here's the way, because it sounds like you had gotten all these, all this material, and you started going through it, and it became kind of cathartic for you to go through it because it flooded memories back to you,
right?
And then you were taking an almost kind of self-healing in a way. But if somebody else wanted to, if they were more musically inclined and they wanted to do something like that, how would you tell them to get started, or how would you tell them as far as an idea of process for them to help themselves?
Somebody, a doctor said this, and I forgot her name, but she said it's 3 T's to healing, and it's therapy, tears, and time. So I would just tell them to succumb to the feeling that they're feeling, and if they're musically inclined, whether it's I look at a DJ as a drum, pick up the closest thing to them. Pick up the closest thing to you, which in my case was a journal and my father's tapes, and start doing that. Like, just start doing it now, and document how you feel, right? It's very important that you document how you feel, because then you can go and reflect on that feeling when you're feeling down. So if I have, and this is why hip hop is so, everybody is so kind of amazed by it, because it was so creative. Like, they made nothing from something. And that's the power of kumbaya. So if I have a guitar or some chopsticks or whatever, or a doodle, I just start doing it, and the body knows how to heal and regenerate itself if we listen to it.
Oh, very good. So another person wrote in here and they said, where can your book be purchased? And actually, I'm going to put the Amazon link up here up on the screen. The other question they had is, did you do any group therapy, or were you involved in any support groups, and how did that help you, if you were?
I told you my support groups were ciphers. So yeah, but I was involved in as a child being in foster care, we had to go through support through DFS. So yeah, I was, but when I experienced my passion and my purpose, I would have hip hop ciphers. And these hip hop ciphers, if you know what that is, it's like somebody play a beat and each person rap. And that was a form of therapy and support for me.
So you're so you did, whenever you were younger through DCFS, you had some therapy that you went through, but did you not find that quite as helpful as the music therapy that you went through later?
To be honest with you, I write about it in the memoir. It was helpful. It was helpful. Absolutely. I'm not gonna play that down. But the thing with the music and the hip hop gave context, gave me a deeper context to the things that I was going through. So like when I say a kid in India ordered my book, and somebody in Africa ordered my book because they was like, hip hop saved my life too. I was going through this and I was going through that, and I was able to express myself. So when I say it gives it context, it makes it relatable. The therapist at the time just couldn't relate to the things that I was going through. So when I hear a song from Tupac or Lauryn Hill and they're talking about the exact same thing that I went through, it validates my truth.
So would you be an advocate then for folks maybe who may be in therapy or having trouble to maybe even to share with their therapist the music that they're listening to and the things that they associate with more? So, like you just mentioned the songs that you like. So you'd say, for instance, this is what I've experienced this. This is what speaks to me. And
Right.
then do you think that would give them a better understanding of the person that they're dealing with?
I think that would be amazing. And that's kind of a takeaway from this. So thank you for sharing it. That would be amazing.
Okay, and as we wrap up here, if anybody else has any more questions, please feel free to send them in. But before we get to those, if we get some more in, do you have like some pearls of wisdom? So let's say somebody is in crisis and they need some help. What would be your, kind of your 3 bullet points or 4 bullet points or whatever you'd say? Here's what you need to do. Boom, boom, boom.
Okay, so if somebody's in crisis, as a mental health professional, I work for the Department of Mental Health. I always say mental health first aid, which is seek help, right? Seek help. And my thing with seeking help is I believe in the power of presence and power of like your voice and your touch. So I'm very headstrong on calling someone and just telling them what you're feeling, either going to their house. Also, another point that I want to talk about is, like the therapist said, and I overheard her, give your pain a voice. So if you feel like, something isn't right, you have to speak out against it, or are you only suffering? So we got give your pain a voice, the power of presence, and we also got my favorite, right, is self-therapy. Self-therapy. What feels good to you, and whatever that is, give yourself permission to do it. The body knows what the body needs. So I would say meditation is very important because it helps you to be still and to listen to your thoughts in your body. So that's kind of like really key to the healing process, because like I said, I'm a survivor, but I couldn't write a book, record music. I'm a wife, cook food, and do all those things if I didn't listen to my body and, didn't take heed. So those would be my 4 bullet points. And start collecting and listen to great music and just write down how it makes you feel.
Oh, very good. We got another question. Looks like it's from a music therapist. They said, any advice for music therapists for how to incorporate hip-hop ciphers in groups when the music therapist has no background in hip-hop but is working with clients who do have a background? The person's a music therapist and they work with kids who share their stories. So if there's any kind of advice for them.
Oh, hey, music therapist, you're cool. With no background of hip hop. So like when I do go to these different juvenile detentions, I mean, I've spoke to like Latino kids, Brazilian kids. I don't know the music that they listen to, but I would say you have to kind of like speak that. You don't even have to like speak their language. I'm trying to see what I'm trying to say here. But it's all about being genuine. So, ask them, what's the last record you played? I would say give it steps. What's the last record you played or what you listening to? And then you listen to that. And that will give you context onto like what their emotional state is, what they're feeling, and who they relate themselves to be. So I would say take baby steps. See what they're listening to, see what they're like. One time they can walk in and you can just be playing it, and that sparks a whole conversation. What you know about this? I'm, just trying to get introduced to it. And I feel like when it's more organic, then it's more receptive, right? As far as the hip-hop ciphers go, I would say you will have to probably go to one and see what it's like. And that's probably your training right there. And I mean, I can give you my information. I'll be more than helpful to like tell you what the hip hop ciphers are and all of that stuff and introduce you to the community.
So we do have another question here that folks want to get a hold of you. And so if you don't mind, just do you have contact information you can just put out verbally, and then I'll send everybody an email afterwards with that contact info? Yeah,
so you can reach me. All my social media is my name, Aza Njeri, Azanjeri. If you want my book, it's on my website. I have a publishing company, and that's www.trueandlivingpress.com. And you also can contact me through my website. So I have a bullet where you can just contact me, and I'm pretty responsive.
Great. Well, thank you. So trueandlivingpress.com, and your book's available on there too. Aza Njeri is here today with us. We really appreciate you taking time to talk to everybody, and thank you very much. Look for her speaking again near you. Watch for her name and watch for her book. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Everybody have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.